Well, on this episode of Steele Creek Explorer, angry birds. Just kidding. On this Steele Creek Explorer, we're going to talk about spring nesting of some of our native bird species. You guys are good birds. Ah, ow! All right, so the name of the game today is birds nesting and what we can do to facilitate their nesting, both here in the park, and hopefully you can take these skills and apply them to your own homes and your own yards and your own families. Because birds, like all organisms, they have a few key needs. They need food, they need access to water, they need to be able to mate and reproduce, and they have to have shelter. Birds are one of the groups of vertebrates that have a high degree of parental care. And so that means that most birds will build a nest and they will actively tend to that nest and to the young after they hatch for some period of time. So for many birds, like one we'll meet, their requirements for a nesting site are comparatively small. But for some birds, especially the cavity nesting birds, finding a suitable site in which to build a nest is a considerable challenge. So think of a natural cavity that might exist in nature. Woodpeckers are one of the groups of birds that don't need to find a cavity. They can excavate their own with those special bills and muscles in the backs of their necks. Woodpeckers can create their own cavities as they did in this tree right here. The amazing thing though, this tree just fortunately broke apart to show the cavity on the inside. And this was an example of the woodpecker didn't dig out this entire space. It probably just found a space that was already present inside the log. So the woodpecker will modify the home somewhat. It may bring in some bedding materials. Other birds will use these cavities after the fact. Carolina wrens and screech owls and all sorts of birds will then modify this in subsequent seasons to use that as a nesting site for themselves. But so outside of woodpeckers and then a few birds that get lucky and find a cavity that naturally exists, one thing that we can do to help a lot of our native species is to provide artificial cavities for them. So these come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a classic house that is intended for bluebirds, although there are other native species that will use these houses as well. These are ones that you can make or you can buy readily. We'll give you some tips on how to install those and show you some of ours. And then you also get bird houses that are in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. This is an unusual one we'll talk more about in a moment that will attract purple martins, but also tree swallows and other cavity nesting birds as well. So we'll see some of these in the wild, and let's go ahead and head out into the park and see what we're doing to facilitate nesting birds. Well, if you ever visit the Nature Center, then you'll know that this behind me is a familiar sight. And what this is a nesting colony that is a fascinating story that is equal parts natural history, but also cultural human history. Because what this is a nesting site for purple martins. Now, other species will use it. You may see some tree swallows popping around behind me, or you may see some of those purple martins. But the purple martins are colonial nesting birds. You can't just set up one purple martin house and hope for purple martins. You have to put up a bunch because they nest as colonies. But one of the familiar shapes that you find for purple martin nests is this right here, and this is called a gourd house. It's not made out of an actual gourd, it's made out of plastic, but it looks like a gourd. And yet these purple martin houses have to go up high. And if you know anything about how gourds grow, you know that they don't grow up on the tops of trees dangling like tree fruits. No, they grow on vines trailing across the ground. Think pumpkins and squash, those are gourds. So why in the world would there be gourd shapes hanging up high and purple martins be nesting in them? Well, that's where our species comes into play, because humans in America have been inviting purple martins to nest in their communities for a very long time. First Nations people right here in North America understood that tree swallows are aggressive predators of agricultural pests. So having a purple martin colony in your village reaped rewards for the village when it came time to harvest those crops. They also eat aerial pests as well, like mosquitoes. So purple martins are just a wonderful species to try to foster and encourage their nesting in your own home and neighborhood. But so what did those indigenous Americans use? They used what they had on hand. Gourds that they would carve into birdhouses, and they would hang them up high. Well, the tree swallows have associated this shape with a nesting structure for so long that they have adapted alongside human beings to recognize this shape as something to nest in, even though it's not something that would ever naturally be found in a suitable habitat for purple martins to use. You'll also notice that we're not using gourds here at the Nature Center anymore. We've now opted for a different kind of nest. These are less likely to encourage nesting from unwanted species, and they're made out of metal, which is better than the plastic in some ways. But the purple martins will use those as well. The purple martin houses come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some of them they call martin mansions. They look like like a human house with multiple places for the purple martins to live. So far we're trying out this and it seems to be working pretty well. But in addition to the martins, other species will use those boxes. Maybe you don't want that. In the case of the tree swallows, we'll tolerate a few of those nests as well, and it shouldn't interfere with the martins as long as they don't take over. The most important part, whether it's a martin nest or any other nest box that you are putting up, is to make sure that you keep them clean from one year to the next. Don't just put up a box in your yard and forget about it forever. Before the nesting season for that species starts, go in there, clean it out, make sure that it's ready for this next season. And so that's a big task for our purple martin colony, is taking those down and cleaning them out every year before those martins start using it. The other tip about establishing purple martins is that it takes time. Very few people are lucky enough to put up a purple martin colony nesting site and then get martins that very first year. What you have to do is typically put it up and keep it maintained year after year, and it may take multiple years before the first colony sets up shop. But once they do, you have it ready for them each successive year, and they will keep coming back year after year after year. Well, a visitor to the park might notice one of quite a few boxes that look like this. This is a box that is set up to attract bluebirds to nest. Bluebirds are a species, a small songbird species that are cavity nesters, and they have no ability to create their own cavities, so they have to find suitable nest sites in the wild, or they've also adapted pretty readily to using human-made nest structures. So we take great care in our Bluebird Nest Box program here in the park. We keep track of all the data, all the fledglings that come out of it. And this is a species that will also adapt to most home environments as well. You'll notice that our box is out in the open. They like open spaces, and they tend to prefer for the opening of the box to face either north or south. It's best if it doesn't face west, because then it'll get a lot of prevailing winds from our west will disrupt the nesting activities inside. Yeah, simple box. You can find these at any store that sells home products. You can also make them yourself. The important part though to any bluebird box is to make sure that it has a door where you can access it after the season is over to clean it out, because remember, it is vitally important to keep those bird boxes clean from one nesting year to the next. So we are intentionally showing you this box from a distance because at the time of this shoot, there is an active nest that is being built inside that box, and eggs have already been laid. So we don't want to disrupt that family any more than we have to, so we're going to show you this one from a distance. Well, we'll give you a quick peek inside this one because, as I said, all of our nest boxes are active right now. This one has a nest that's actively being built inside of it, but there are no eggs yet, and Mom and Dad aren't nearby. So I'm going to show you real quick what's inside. This is that bluebird box with an openable door, and you'll see the nest inside. Now it's best if you're facilitating bluebirds in your home to not mess with them while they're actively breeding. But at the end of the summer, and they may have 2 or even 3 broods of chicks per year, but once you get into the late fall or even the winter, come in here, open that door, clean it out, and then it'll be ready for the nesting cycle next year. So this is a great time of year to actually be able to tell male from female Canada geese. Unlike ducks, where the sexes are dissimilar, geese, the males and the females look pretty much identical. The way that you can tell, and they're being equally aggressive towards me, or I shouldn't say aggressive, they're being equally defensive towards me because they see me as a threat. But with most bird species, the females are larger than the males, which makes sense if you think about how much resources go into creating eggs. So when they are paired up for the breeding season, the bigger one, that's mom, and the smaller one, that's dad. So I'll give you a tip. If you ever encounter these birds or other Canada geese that are nesting in Steele Creek Park or anywhere, the secret to communicating with them is to not turn your back to them. That is goose language for showing a sign of submission. If you keep your eyes locked on them, and especially if you keep the front of your body facing them, yep, they will posture, they will threaten, they'll hiss, but it's very rare that they would actively come after you. But if you turn your back and go to walk away from them, that might encourage them to chase. So the best thing to do is just to leave them alone, give them a wide berth, unlike what I was doing, and then just keep your eyes on them and they won't attack you. And even if they do, it's not usually the end of the world. Canada geese are herbivores. They don't have sharp beaks or powerful jaw muscles or anything. If they bite, it's gonna hurt your feelings more than it hurts your body. You guys are good parents. I'm gonna leave you alone. Well, thanks for coming along with me today as I showed you just a few of the ways in which we encourage native species and their breeding efforts here in Steele Creek Park. And I also invite you to offer places for breeding birds to take part in your own lives, in your backyard, on your property. Because not only is that good for the birds, it's good for our natural ecosystem in our area. It's also good for you because it's fun and it relieves stress. But do you know what? You can also get involved with citizen science initiatives. You can report the birds that are nesting on your property to sites like iNaturalist, or especially the Cornell Lab of Ornithology Nest Watch program. They compile data from all over about the breeding birds that people have in their yards and on their properties. So I encourage you to get involved at home, but also come visit Steele Creek Park, because here's where you can be the explorer.